This video is going to cover adding and subtracting both fractions and mixed numbers. So go ahead and title up the next page that's available in your notebook, adding and subtracting fractions and mixed numbers. So title that page and then we will get started. Okay, so you are going to be filling out this note sheet. It will end up gluing into your notebook, but as of right now, we're just going to write our notes on it, do our examples. There will also be some additional examples that you'll need to do on the next page in your notebook. So make sure you are recording all of the notes from this video into your notebook. So we're going to start in the top left-hand corner, which is just adding fractions. So there's no mixed numbers involved, just adding fractions. So we're going to look at the left side here first. And what's the most important rule when we're adding fractions is we must have a common denominator. So you need to make sure you have that common denominator first. We can't just add straight across, which is what a lot of students want to end up doing. We need to get a denominator that's common between the two, and then we change our fractions in order to add them. So here it says change numerator and denominator by multiplying by the same number. So whatever you multiply the denominator by, you also have to multiply the numerator by. So our next bullet point, it starts off with a blank here. We want to add the numerators, and we want to just keep denominators. So we're going to leave the denominators alone once we have that common denominator, and we're going to add our numerators together. And we're going to add that just straight across. And then our last step here is to simplify, if that is possible. So we have to make sure we are familiar with our divisibility rules, if there's anything that goes into both the numerator and denominator evenly. So we've got our example problem here, 1/3 plus 5/6. So here we first need to look at our denominators and come up with a common denominator. Now in this one, we're actually kind of lucky because the common denominator would be 6. There's many other common denominators, but we want to try and find the least common denominator, so the smallest one. If we choose 6, we actually only need to change one of the two fractions. So we're going to leave that 5/6 alone, since it already has that denominator of 6. And we want to change this first fraction to have a denominator of 6 as well. So then we have to go back up to our original problem here, and we had to multiply 3 by 2 to get the 6. So then we also have to do the exact same thing to our numerator. So this kind of goes back to this first bullet point here, change the numerator and denominator by multiplying by the same number. So 2 multiplied by 1 gives us 2. So now that we have a common denominator, we're going to add our numerators. We add straight across. 2 plus 5 gives us 7. Our denominator stays the same. We keep it the same. We've got 7/6. Now this is called an improper fraction, meaning our numerator is larger than our denominator. We need to change that into a mixed number. So we're going to see how many times does this 6 go into our 7? 1 time. And then once we take one group of 6 away from the 7, we're left with 1 left over. Denominator stays the same. So our final answer here, 1/3 plus 5/6 should equal 1 1/6. So now we have another example, and although you don't have any room on your note sheet, I want you to go ahead to the next page in your notebook and try this following problem, 3/4 plus 1/10. So for this problem, when I look at my denominators of 4 and 10, my first thought is to change both of them to a denominator of 20. So I'm going to change them both to a denominator of 20. So when I look at my 3/4, I have to multiply 4 by 5 to get to 20. So I do the same thing to my numerator. And then when I look at 1/10, I change my denominator to 20 by multiplying by 2. So I have to do the same thing to my numerator. So my two bottom fractions now should be 15/20 plus 2/20. Now, again, remember, once you have that common denominator, that's going to stay the same. So our final answer is going to have a denominator of 20. We do not add our denominators, but we do add our numerators. So we've got a 15 and we've got a 2. We're going to add those together, and we get 17/20. Now, before we're done, we have to make sure, is this improper? No, so we're going to leave it alone. Can I simplify it at all by dividing numerator and denominator by the same number? Again, our answer is no. So 17/20 is our final answer for this problem. So we're going to go ahead and continue on, and we're going to with addition, but we're actually going to be looking at mixed numbers as well now. So it's really, really similar to what we had on our last note, on the other part of our note sheet. It still is adding with fractions. We just happen to have these whole numbers here. So our first note here, again, you must have that common denominator for the fractional part of your number, meaning the fractions need common denominators again. For our whole numbers, we leave those alone. We're really focusing on getting the common denominator of our fractions. So for our notes, the first bullet point says to add something. So we actually add our whole numbers. Then we want to add our fractions. And the only way we can add our fractions is if we have a common denominator first. Now, once we add our fractions, if the fractional part is an improper fraction, meaning our numerator is larger than our denominator, we need to change that into a mixed number. And when we do that, the whole number we add to our already whole number. So we're going to show that on this step here, and so that part might make a little bit more sense once you see it. And then our last step is, again, to simplify if that is possible. So I'm going to go ahead over to the example in our notes, 3 4/9 plus 1 5/6. So our whole numbers stay the same. And now we're going to look at our fractions, the 4/9 and the 5/6. And we want to get a common denominator. So here, I'm going to use 18. Again, it's going to be that smallest denominator. It makes it easier at the end, simplifying. So I had to multiply 9 by 2 to get 18. So I have to do the same thing to my numerator, multiply by 2. So I have 8/18. I had to multiply 6 by 3 to get to 18. So I have to do the same thing to my numerator, multiply by 3. And I get 15/18. So once we've gotten the common denominator, which is our very first step, we must have that common denominator for our fractions. We want to add the whole numbers. So 3 plus 1 gives us 4. Now we're going to look at our fractions. It says to add the fraction part. So I'm going to look at my 8 plus 15. And when I add 8 and 15, we get 23 over 18, because remember, our denominator stays the same. So now this is going to be the step that goes back to here. If the fraction part is improper, change it to a mixed number and add to the whole number. So I'm going to look at 23 over 18 and change that into a mixed number first. So 18 goes into 23 one time. And I'm left with 5 left over. So 1 5/18. Now, this 1 5/18 needs to be added to our whole number of 4. So I'm going to add this whole number 4, that whole number 1, and I get a total of 5. And then the fraction that's left over is 5/18. 5 5/18. So we just took this improper fraction, made it a mixed number, and then added that to our whole number. So we've got another example here of adding mixed numbers. So again, you're not going to have any room on your note sheet. So go ahead back to that extra sheet in your notebook and try the following problem. We want to add the mixed numbers together. So use your notes if you need to. Attempt this problem and then we will check through it together. Okay, so we've got 5 4/7 plus 6 3/4. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to rewrite these fractions with a common denominator. And when I look at 7 and 4, I'm going to choose 28 as my common denominator. So for my 4/7, I had to multiply 7 by 4. So I have to do the same thing to my numerator. 4 times 4 is 16. Then I look at my 3/4. I have to multiply 4 by 7. So I have to do the same thing to my numerator. 3 multiplied by 7 gives me 21. Our next step is to add the whole numbers. 5 plus 6, which gives us 11. Then what we need to do is add our numerators. So 16 plus 21. And we get a total of 37 over 28. So again, we have this case where our fraction is an improper fraction. I'm going to go to the side again, make it a little bit easier. We have some more room. 37/28. We know 28 can go into 37 one time. And when we take 28 away from 37, we have 9 left over. So 1 and 9/28. So these two have the same value, but this is a proper fraction. It's a mixed number. So 9/28 cannot be simplified. So what we do here now is take this 1 and 9/28 and we add it to the 11 that we already had. So 11 plus this another whole number 1 is going to give us 12. And then our fraction is 9/28. So 12 and 9/28 should be our final answer there. So this wraps up our video on adding both mixed numbers and just regular fractions. Our note sheet should be filled out. We did a couple extra problems that should also be written in your notebook. So go ahead and once this video ends, go to our next video that goes over subtracting fractions and mixed numbers, and we will finish filling out this note sheet.